Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take the sources you send us, really dig in and pull out the key insights.
Think of us as helping you navigate some pretty complex ideas so you can get informed fast.
And today we are definitely diving deep. We've got excerpts from Friedrich Nietzsche's The Twilight of the Idols and The Antichrist.
Yeah, these are definitely not light reading. They're a direct challenge to some really foundational beliefs about truth, about morality, about life itself.
So our mission here is to unpack Nietzsche's big critiques, especially of traditional values and Christianity.
Right. Understand where he's coming from, look at the alternatives he hints at, and, see why these ideas still hit so hard today. What questions do they raise for you?
Okay, let's start with Nietzsche himself. The sources paint him as this real outsider,
Very much so. A single exception, they say, escaping the general insanity of Europe.
offering truths that maybe weren't considered true yet.
Exactly. He's all about this world, the one we live in,
Yeah.
not some other perfect realm.
And he thinks this world needs fixing. A total overhaul.
A transvaluation of all values. That's his phrase. He thinks something's gone fundamentally wrong, and we need to rethink everything from the ground up.
And that sense of wrongness jumps out immediately with this question from the sources. To what end did Christianity avail itself of falsehood?
It's a really pointed question, isn't it? He's basically suggesting deliberate deception.
Right. Now, the sources mention he talks about arbitrary make-believe elsewhere, like in art maybe.
He does, but here the focus is different. He sees a specific kind of lie as dangerous. For Nietzsche, truth means saying yes to life as it is, to becoming all the change and flux.
So denying that, aiming for something static or otherworldly, that's the lie.
That's the damaging lie, yes. And he thinks it harms us, like physiologically deep down.
Okay, let's unpack his issues with traditional philosophy then. Mistrusting the senses seems key.
Absolutely. Philosophers want to get away with the body, he says. He calls them mummies, monotheists, gravediggers.
Huh?
Pretty strong stuff.
Mummies. Wow. Because they prefer abstract concepts over sensory experience.
Exactly. They ignore the messy, real data from our senses and trust only these, pure ideas, concepts detached from the physical world.
But he makes an exception for Heraclitus.
Ah, yes. Heraclitus is the hero here. Because Heraclitus did trust the senses.
Why?
Because the senses show us becoming, transiency, and change, everything flowing. Nietzsche is right there with them.
So the world we see and touch,
Yeah.
that's the real deal.
The apparent world is the only world, he says. Any talk of a true world beyond it is just a false adjunct, like an unnecessary, misleading add-on.
And he links trusting the senses to scientific progress.
He does. He points out, quite rightly, that real scientific breakthroughs depend on carefully observing and trusting our senses. Even the nose, he says, is a fine instrument.
Huh, okay. So metaphysics, theology, they miss the mark.
In his view, yes. They become abortive and not yet science because they try to skip over or deny what our senses tell us about reality.
All right, so mistrusting senses is one big error. What's another he focuses on?
It's this idea of first causes and how philosophers mix up cause and effect.
How so? What's the confusion?
They assume the highest things, like God or pure being, couldn't possibly have evolved from lower, messier origins.
Okay.
And this ties into confusing cause and effect in morality, too. People see, say, weakness or sickness as the result of behaving badly.
Right, like vice leads to illness.
Nietzsche flips it. He suggests maybe the underlying weakness or degeneration is the cause. It leads someone to adopt certain behaviors, maybe asceticism, maybe virtue, simply because they lack the strength for anything else.
Ah, so they mistake the outward behavior for the cause when it's really the consequence of an inner state.
Precisely. They get the sequence wrong.
And this seems connected to his idea of imaginary causes. Why invent things like God, the soul, free will?
This is his psychological angle. He calls it a psychology of error. Basically, when something strange or bad happens, it's scary not knowing why.
So we make up reasons.
Any explanation feels better than none at all, right? Attributing suffering to sin or a feeling of power to grace gives a sense of order, comfort, a feeling of power, crucially.
So we choose explanations that make us feel in control, even if they're imaginary.
That's the idea. The proof of happiness, of power, becomes the test for truth. We grab the easiest explanation linked to what we know.
Like the banker thinks of business, the Christian thinks of sin.
Exactly. And he adds a darker layer. Attributing things to free will or the ego serves our instinct of punishment and of the desire to judge.
How does that work?
Well, if you chose to do wrong freely, then you can be blamed, you can be punished. He claims the whole doctrine of the will was invented principally for the purpose of punishment.
Wow. Okay, so philosophy's errors set the stage for his critique of morality in Christianity.
Absolutely. He sees traditional morality, especially the church's version, as fundamentally an enemy of nature.
Enemy of nature. That sounds extreme.
He argues that trying to attack passions at their root to extirpate them, like castration, is deeply hostile to life.
Why would anyone do that?
He thinks it's the choice of the too weak of will, too degenerate. People who can't handle their own drives try to destroy them instead. He even notes that the harshest critics of the senses were often those who physically needed asceticism.
So what's the alternative to just crushing passions?
He talks about spiritualization. You don't kill the drive, you elevate it, transform it.
Like how?
Spiritualization of sensuality becomes love, and spiritualization of hostility isn't about destroying enemies like the church might want, but realizing their value, maybe as challenges that make you stronger.
Yeah, the Christian goal, peace of the soul. He's not a fan.
Deeply suspicious. He wonders if it's a misunderstanding or maybe a sign of exhaustion, senility of our will, even just laziness.
Because struggle is necessary for a big life.
For a grand life, yes. Renouncing struggle, just seeking peace, could be a sign of decline, not strength in his view.
This leads him to contrast different kinds of morality, doesn't it?
Right. There's natural morality, guided by the life instinct, clearing the way for life to flourish.
Now the other kind.
Morality antagonistic to nature. And he claims almost all the morality we're taught falls into this category.
How is it antagonistic?
It's directed against our basic life instincts. It sets up God as the enemy of life. The saint becomes the ideal eunuch. Life, he says, terminates where the kingdom of God begins. It's a rejection of the body, the senses, the drives.
And this connects back to the cause and effect thing. Virtue isn't the cause of a good life.
Exactly. He insists virtue is a consequence of a strong, healthy constitution. Health enables virtue.
Not the other way around.
Right. Vice, luxury, those are sequels to physiological decline, not the cause. Making mistakes, he says, comes from degeneration of the instincts to disintegration of the will. That's almost the definition of evil for him.
So what's truly valuable is instinctual.
Yes, it feels easy, necessary, free. If you have to struggle hard for virtue, it might mean you're fighting your own nature.
The sources mention the church's idea of improving man.
Yeah, and his take is that this improvement actually meant making man weak and harmless, making him sick.
How? Is there an example?
He uses the image of the blonde beast, these noble, strong types being lured into monasteries. They become caricatures, sinners, turning their strength against themselves.
That's quite the image.
He even, very controversially, points to the strict rules against the Chandala caste in ancient India diet, the law of the knife, as examples of deliberately making people sick to control them. We should stress this is Nietzsche's interpretation and comparison presented in the sources.
And he sees modern morality, compassion, equality, helping others through this same lens, as a sign of decline.
He does, yes. He calls modern virtues like fellow feeling and gentleness part of a weak age, a mollification of morals.
Contrasted with what?
With the hardness and even terribleness possible in an age that has a surplus of life and abundance of energy. He even suggests modern virtues like hard work, fairness, science might be driven by witness as ways to cope or find meaning when vitality is low.
And this critique extends to ideas like equality and democracy.
Very much so. For him, as presented in the sources, equality means leveling down, making everyone uniform, which he links to cultural decline.
He mentions specific thinkers.
He critiques English and French sociology for studying only decadent societies and mistaking those declining instincts for the human norm. He labels socialists and Herbert Spencer as decadents for wanting the triumph of altruism, which he views as an instinct of the weak.
What about liberal institutions?
He argues they undermine the will to power, turning people into passive cattle once established. Modern democracy for him is a decaying form of the state because it lacks the strong will needed for great institutions.
And freedom.
He claims that what often passes for freedom is just wanting to live without responsibility.
This seems to connect to resentment. That feels like a really important concept for him.
Oh, it's absolutely key. Resentment is that hidden, gnawing resentment the weak feel towards the strong, the successful, the noble.
And the priest figure feeds on this.
That's his argument. The priest needs sickness, suffering, and resentment in his flock to gain power. He judges life from a position of weakness and hatred, according to Nietzsche.
And this fuels his attack on the theological instinct.
Yes. He calls it the most universal, most subterranean form of falsity. He claims that whatever a theologian deems true must be false, because that perspective inherently rejects this life.
He even drags Kant into it.
He sees Kant's success as a theologian's success. Inventing practical reason, Nietzsche argues, was just a trick to prop up traditional morality when pure reason wouldn't support it, a break on uprightness. The priest defined truth because the priest ruled.
So Christianity, for Nietzsche, is just completely detached from reality.
That's the core of his critique in these sources. He says flat out, neither its morality nor its religion touches reality. It's built on fictions.
Like what?
Imaginary causes, imaginary effects, imaginary beings, God, angels, imaginary natural history, imaginary psychology, imaginary teleology. It's a total denial of reality.
And the Christian concept of God is central to this denial.
Absolutely. He argues a healthy people's God reflects their strength, their will to power. When a people declines, their God shrinks too, becomes timid, counseling peace of the soul, just the good God.
He thinks the idea of a God who is only good is decadent.
An abortion of decadence. Yes, the Christian God, a God of the sick, the spider, the spirit, he calls the most corrupt concept of God ever, a contradiction of life, declaring war on life, nature, the will to power.
He draws a comparison with Buddhism here regarding illness.
It's a stark contrast he makes. Buddhism, in his view here, might be for older, perhaps weary people, senile men, but it seeks peace through realism, temperance, hardening.
And Christianity.
He argues Christianity aims to tame the inner beasts of prey by making them ill, by weakening them. He controversially states that Christianity needs illness to function, just like ancient Greece needed health.
The whole system is designed to make people ill.
That's his provocative claim. He even calls the church a Catholic lunatic asylum.
So it all comes back to resentment, its origins.
Fundamentally, yes. He sees it born from the lowest classes, the submerged masses, a rebellion, a great counterstroke against the noble values of the ancient world.
Built on the resentment of the masses.
Exactly. Waging war on any sense of hierarchy, reverence, distance between people, the pathos of distance, he calls it, which he thinks is necessary for any kind of elevation or greatness.
Even immortality for everyone is an outrage.
Granting it to everyone, regardless of worth, he considers the greatest outrage upon noble humanity.
And maintaining this requires the holy lie.
Yes, the pretense of holiness, the fraud in word and pose. He sees this developed as an art in the Bible, connecting it to Jewish tradition in the sources, and then perfected by Christianity.
Christianity mastered lying for holy purposes.
That's his charge. And faith, for him, becomes simply the refusal to know what is true, a command not to question. This constraint to lie is, for him, the very definition of decadence.
Which inevitably puts it against science.
A mortal enemy, he calls it. Faith, as an imperative, is a veto against science. It means lies at any price.
He thinks Paul knew this.
He suggests Paul understood that falsehood, the holy lie, was necessary for Christianity's success. Paul's real enemies, the clear-sighted ones, the good old philologists and doctors who could see behind the holy books, see the physiological rottenness Nietzsche believed was underneath.
Okay, wow. That is a comprehensive demolition job on philosophy, morality, Christianity, seen through this lens of strength versus weakness, life affirmation versus denial.
It really is. But he doesn't just tear down. He does offer, well, hints of alternatives. Where does value lie for him?
Art seems important.
Hugely important. Art is a counterforce to decline. True ecstasy, born from strong passions, feels like increased strength and abundance.
And art comes from that.
Art is the compulsion to transfigure into the beautiful. Man rejoicing in his own perfection, it's the opposite of the low-vitality, anti-artistic state.
He mentions Apollonian and Dionysian.
Yes, those Greek concepts. Apollonian is about vision, form, order, the sculptor's art. Dionysian is about intoxication, passion, transformation, losing oneself, musical rapture, perhaps.
And art isn't just for art's sake.
No, it's the great stimulus to life, especially tragic art, which celebrates defiance even in the face of suffering.
And given his views on altruism, what about egoism?
He talks about the natural value of egoism, but its value depends on the person.
How so?
Is it the egoism of an ascending, overflowing life, or the needy self-concern of a declining one? He thinks decadence actually leads to altruism because the instincts are so disintegrated you don't even know your own true interest anymore.
And complaining is bad.
Despicable, it's weakness, and it often contains a hidden desire for revenge against life itself.
There's a really tough section in the sources, a moral for doctors.
Yes, this is deeply challenging. He provocatively suggests the sick person can be seen as a parasite on the healthy.
And doctors should.
From the perspective of promoting ascending life, he suggests they might need to administer disgust, and even, under extreme circumstances for the sake of higher types, consider ruthlessly suppressing and eliminating degenerate life. It's crucial to understand this is presented as part of his radical, life-focused philosophy, not a practical policy proposal in a modern context. It's incredibly harsh.
And his idea of freedom is also quite different.
Yeah, maybe the value isn't in the easy life freedom gives, but in what it costs to achieve and maintain it, the struggle.
So real freedom needs discipline?
An anti-liberal will, he says. Tradition, authority, self-mastery, just laissez-aller, letting go, is a sign of decadence for those who actually need structure. Life has to push forward, even into difficulty, because going backwards isn't really possible.
What about genius? How does that fit in?
Great people, great eras are like explosive material. Genius is a squanderer of energy. Their greatness is in spending themselves, an outflowing power instinct.
Not self-sacrifice.
Not in the weak sense, it's an overflow. The self-preservation instinct gets suspended by sheer abundance of power.
He brings back the Chandala idea here, the lowest caste.
Yes, but he applies it, ironically, to valuable people, scientists, artists, geniuses, who were historically suppressed when the priest type ruled. They lived in a kind of semi-sepulchral atmosphere.
Why Chandala?
Because these pioneers of the spirit feel that terrible chasm separating them from tradition. They might even live a Catilinarian life full of hate, revenge, revolt as they fight the old ways.
The sources also connect beauty to breeding. This sounds controversial too.
Extremely. He argues beauty isn't accidental, but the result of generations of effort, great sacrifices, deliberate cultivation. Noble education has to start with the body.
And he mentions the caste system.
He controversially refers to the order of castes in the laws of Manu, presenting it, through his lens, as reflecting a supreme law of life itself, needed to maintain society, and, crucially, to breed higher types of humans.
Inequality is necessary for rights.
The inequality of rights is the only condition of there being rights at all, is the quote from the source reflecting his view. Right becomes a privilege. He fiercely condemns socialism, the Chandala apostles preaching equality, arguing they stir up resentment and undermine the working man's potential happiness. The real wrong, for him, isn't unequal rights, but the demand for equal rights. Again, we're relaying his argument from the sources.
Which leads us to maybe his most famous and strangest idea, eternal recurrence.
The weighty thought. If the universe has finite energy acting over infinite time, then every single moment, every configuration must have already happened infinitely many times and will happen again exactly the same way forever.
Everything repeats exactly the same.
Infinitely. It also means there's no ultimate goal or end point for the universe, because that would imply change stopping.
That's mind-bending. And kind of terrifying.
He calls it the terrible chamber of truth. How could anyone bear it? To know this moment with all its joy and pain will come back again and again.
What's the answer then?
The only way to endure it, he suggests, is to become the kind of being who can endure it, to affirm it, to will it.
And this is the Superman, the Übermensch.
Exactly. The Superman is the type that needs to be reared, willed. The being of higher value who has the strength to face the hardest truths, including eternal recurrence. The opposite of the complacent last man seeking only comfort.
The goal is to create something beyond current humanity.
To bring forth creatures which stand sublimely above the whole species man. And this vision, as presented, doesn't shy away from the idea of sacrificing others, oneself, for this higher goal.
So, old morality stabilized the species.
But now the aim can be elevation, creating a higher type. This will increase differences, accentuate all contrasts and gulfs, eliminate uniformity.
And these supermen would rule.
Interestingly, the sources suggest they might exist side by side with the last man, but separate, like Epicurean gods detached. The focus is on the creation of this being.
How is this achieved?
It requires a new kind of community, maybe martial values, competition, agon, a new nobility through breeding. Ruling involved hardness and mildness. Controversially, again, the degenerate might be used as experimental subjects in things like dietetics, a consecration of punishment for the sake of the higher type's health.
Developing the inner devil, procreation as holy.
Yes, harnessing powerful instincts, seeing creation as sacred. Inner conflict is seen as necessary for growth. Pity is a danger because it hinders the necessary hardness and selection.
It's not a sudden jump, though.
No, make every stage perfect. For the Superman, eternal recurrence isn't horror anymore, it's affirmable. Maybe life itself invented this thought to push beyond stagnation.
A desire to repeat everything.
To perish and arise afresh again and again. The ultimate strength is enduring immortality this way. It requires the highest hope, transfiguring pain into blessing, a will to suffering.
Embracing the struggle.
Heroic greatness, yes. The destiny is to be a creator. Organize the higher types, educate future rulers, rejoice in the power to shape things anew. Not only man, but Superman will recur eternally.
Zarathustra, his prophet figure, is peaceful about this.
Waiting patiently for this future, all actions directed towards it. Moving from praying to blessing.
Wow. Okay, we've really been through the ringer there. It's incredibly intense stuff. Nietzsche's critiques are just ferocious, aren't they? Arguing our core values might come from weakness, from resentment.
Absolutely. He forces you to question everything: truth, morality, God, democracy, progress, all through this lens of will to power, physiological states, life affirmation versus life denial. It's unsettling.
And the alternatives, art, egoism, the Superman, eternal recurrence, they're visionary, but also contain some deeply disturbing, controversial elements, especially around selection and inequality.
Definitely. He doesn't offer easy answers, just a radical challenge to be intellectually honest, to face uncomfortable truths, and maybe find strength in that honesty.
This deep dive really gives you a starting point to grapple with these powerful ideas from the sources themselves.
And maybe leave you with this thought he raises. What if our most cherished beliefs, our strongest convictions, are actually, in a way, prisons?
What kind of inner strength would it take to possess a freedom from all conviction? That's certainly something to chew on.